Hey everybody, Chris White with the American Battlefield Trust, and we just have a treat for you today. We are deep in the bowels of the West Point Museum here at the United States Military Academy at West Point. We're here with special access and special permission and with some really amazing artifacts. So to show off some of these artifacts, we have Michael Diaz of the West Point Museum here. Michael, thanks for having us. What's your title here at the West Point Museum?
Sure, so I'm the curator of history and uniforms. So that means I manage the collection for uniforms, flags, soldiers' equipment, medals, and miscellaneous.
I like the miscellaneous because we've seen a lot of miscellaneous. In fact, the room we're standing in might just have Revolutionary War flags, a piece of the Berlin Wall, MacArthur's desk. So we have a little bit of everything in this room that is off the camera. And let's talk just for a minute about the West Point Museum. This tells the story of the U.S. Army from its founding to today.
Certainly. The Congress designates West Point as the repository for all guns and flags captured during the Revolution, right at the end of the war. And so our historical collection really goes back to that period. We've been actively collecting in the early 19th century, open to the public in the 1850s, and we've been open ever since.
And this is a free museum to come
Absolutely. Your tax dollars at play.
All right, so we encourage you to come here. Also check out their social media feeds, and you're not going to want to miss coming up here to see some of these artifacts. And what I want to do is start with this artifact here. Now, West Point predates the American Republic as we know it. West Point will become important in 1775 whenever Congress starts to look at going off to war with Great Britain. Then in 1778, we have fortifications here. There's a lot of things that happen, but in 1802, it becomes the official United States Military Academy here at West Point under Thomas Jefferson. And in 1817, there's a very important man who comes into to the post. Can you tell us about that person?
Sure thing. Sylvanus Thayer is recognized as the father of the academy. We have a couple of superintendents before him, but he's the one that really turns West Point into what we'd recognize it as today. If you dropped a cadet from today's academy in 1803, there's going to be not a lot that they'd recognize. Put them in there in 1818 under Thayer's system. It's a 4-year curriculum. There's a merit-to-merit system. There's an honor code. All the staples of West Point life get established under Thayer.
Duty, honor, country comes from Thayer there, I guess.
Absolutely.
And this is exceedingly special. This is his officer's coat?
Yes.
And can you tell us a little bit about this coat?
Sure. So this dates to this is the coat that he had when he retired. So he's got the rank of a brigadier on the collar. You can see that the essayons on the buttons, that West Point was an engineering school first. It kind of broadened its scope just before the Civil War. But yeah, under Thayer was an engineering heavy curriculum. He's an engineering officer, and he was here for 17 years. And so it's by far the longest serving superintendent, and had a real formative shape on the academy.
And it's interesting you said that it turns us into an engineering school. West Point's the first engineering school in the U.S.
Right.
We have Thayer, who brings in a guy named Dennis Hart Mahan there. Gary, I worked him in there. And Mahan helps to turn this into an engineering school by going to France, learning about Sébastien Vauban, learning about Antoine-Henri Jomini, and coming back over here in Napoleon and bringing what he learned from France here to the academy. And essayons is the motto of the engineers, let us try. So that's very important. Now, looking at this coat, the one thing that I do notice, that it's very short. It looks like we have tails. It looks like we have shoulder boards, epaulets. Can you tell us a little bit about what we're looking at a little bit more here?
Sure. So certainly the modern military has refined how to tell someone's rank. You get a nice little tab right in the middle of the chest that tells you what they are. A little bit more complicated from the 18th and 19th century. So here, this is a specifically engineer's uniform. It's got a laurel and holly sprigs going around a star, so that's a colonel's insignia. And then the epaulets are colonels as well, because Thayer never fully made brigadier. It was a brevet promotion that he operated on for much of the latter part of his career. So he's usually referred to as general, but never had the official rank.
So brevet is basically honorary. It's an honorary rank in a way, even though it's kind of honored. So when we look at George Custer, who's buried here at West Point, he's also a graduate. I think it's he's a major general when the Civil War ends of volunteers, but when he's killed at the Little Bighorn in June of 1876, he's Lieutenant Colonel Custer.
Right.
So his official rank's Lieutenant Colonel, even though he's a brevet Major General. So it can get a little bit confusing.
Yes, certainly.
Yeah, and this is a beautiful, beautiful piece.
And I should note that the embroidery would have been brighter gold, but time has faded that. These were able to clean up and have restored so that they still have that nice luster.
And while Thayer's here, you know, he's the one who, I believe, brings the gray here to West Point for the cadet gray.
So the gray actually predates Thayer. So
Okay.
it's adopted as a wartime necessity during the War of 1812, where basically the Army buys up all the blue wool and has to switch over to gray, both for regular units and for the military academy. So 1815, they adopt the gray uniform on a provisional level.
Okay.
They realize it looks pretty good. So 1816, they make it the official uniform, and then Thayer comes in 1817.
Okay.
So you have a lot of pieces of kind of that West Point tradition, literally the long gray line, get assembled, you know, pretty quickly in the 18 teens.
Yeah, because there's also that story that it was the Battle of Chippewa, that it was Woodfield Scott with the
Right.
gray line there, but that's...
Yeah, that story kind of comes up kind of a little after the fact. It's all very much necessities of the mother of invention in the moment.
Yeah, and it's also cheaper too,
Yes.
from what I understand.
Yep.
So your government tax dollars at work.
Right, and it helps certainly increases cadet morale a little bit that the uniforms are cheaper because as future officers they have to buy their own stuff.
And that was going to be my next question. Thayer had to buy this himself because
Yes.
he's an officer.
Right.
So this is a beautiful piece they pulled out specifically for us. We're going to move in a timeline. So from Thayer, we're going to move to the Mexican-American War. There's a lot of influence from Thayer, Dennis Hart Mahan, who I talked about here a moment ago. This will start to influence our officer corps, men like Pierre-Gustave Toutant Beauregard, George McClellan, Grant, Lee. They're going to go off to the Mexican-American War. Now, these pieces here almost look like they're either map cases or they're tubes for telescopes. They are not those. What are these, Mike?
So these are flagpoles. Particularly as Winfield Scott's army moved through Mexico, they cut down the flagpole of every fort or city that they captured, and they put this decorative plate on it. These are made, the brass here comes from melted down musket fixtures, and then those are sent back to West Point. So Scott's not a graduate himself, but he's a big believer in West Point. He's a big believer in a professional officer corps. He kind of learned that the hard way in the War of 1812. He helped shape the Army in that direction between 1812 and the Mexican War. And then during the Mexican War, he's doing his best to hype up West Point's reputation. And so sending these souvenirs back with these glowing reports of the role that West Pointers have played on the campaign is part of this kind of PR campaign to promote the school.
And what I like about Scott, Scott is buried here at West Point. He died here. But what I like about Scott during the Mexican-American War, even though he's not a West Point graduate, he has what he calls his little cabinet whenever he's in Mexico. He will bring in young officers like Robert E. Lee, Beauregard, McClellan, and sit them around his dinner table, listen to their ideas, listen to, and kind of impart his wisdom and listen to those folks. And I think that was important, maybe made him feel a little bit younger. And in the long run, Winfield Scott was known as the greatest soldier of his age, according to Sir Arthur Wellesley, the man who beat Napoleon at Waterloo.
Yeah.
So these are fantastic. I love the fact that these are captured Mexican muskets that they've melted down and sent back here. I'm not going to pick them up. How heavy are these?
Some are heavier than others. The wood's pretty dried out after all these years, so thankfully they're pretty desiccated. But you got to be careful handling them. You can see some of the age is showing on them a little bit. So we keep these in storage most of the time, but we bring them to the class pretty frequently for cadet instruction. This is Mexican War is a big part of the cadet curriculum here, and the history department has a great class on the material culture of the Mexican War and and memory and how that's preserved here at West Point. So these go up every semester for that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Scott's Mexico City campaign was studied here at West Point by Eisenhower, others. J. Lawton Collins, who's the youngest corps commander in the European theater during the Second World War, actually carried a history of Scott's Mexico campaign with him throughout the the European theater while he was there. So from the Mexican-American War, we move into the next large conflict in American history, and that is obviously the Civil War. Between this point, we're moving up into the 1860s. one thing that we saw on Thayer's collar was his rank, and up until, the early part of the Civil War, the only way to really, there weren't medals or anything like that given out by the Army. There were these things called brevet promotions. So you might be a captain, but you served honorably at Churubusco or Chapultepec, and you might become an honorary major or a lieutenant colonel there. So that was kind of their honorary system. But come 1862, President Lincoln and the War Department comes up with a new idea for a medal to present to soldiers for going above and beyond the call of duty. And it looks like we have one of those medals here, Mike. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Certainly. So this is the first Medal of Honor that was ever awarded.
That's amazing.
It was given to, awarded to a soldier named Jacob Parrott, who was part of what's called the Great Train Robbery, or the Great Railroad Chase, where a force of Union soldiers snuck into from Tennessee into Georgia, stole a train, and then came out, rode back toward Union lines, ripping up rail lines and just making chaos as they went. They were captured. A number of them were later exchanged, and they received the first batch of Medal of Honors. Jacob Parrott, as the youngest of the group, went first.
Wow, and if you missed it, we were on a Georgia video swing last year. You can go check out that video. You can learn more about the Great Train Raid and the Great Locomotive Chase. And it's a fantastic way to, to explore that story. And many of the Andrews Raiders, as they're called, are buried in Chattanooga National Cemetery. And in fact, there's a train on top of the monument there, a locomotive, so that you could see that. Anything else to add about because I know you have more than one Medal of Honor here.
Yeah, certainly. These are certainly the pride and joy of the medal collection. And I think what makes Medal of Honors so impactful is that all of these come with a story, right? All of these have so they let us interpret stories of bravery above and beyond the call of duty. And I think, as you're saying with the you mentioned with the brevet promotions, that's great for recognizing officers, but these medals were given largely to the enlisted, to guys that the Army hadn't done a great job recognizing at previous points in history. So this one cuts across all ranks, and we have quite a few from West Point graduates in the collection.
And it's amazing. If you go through the cemetery here at West Point, you can actually see in front of the graves out there, usually if they have a Medal of Honor plaque. And Mike pulled out one of the drawers for us yesterday while we were here. And as we looked through, you could see the variations of the changes of the Medal of Honor over the years. So if you go to our friends at the Congressional Medal of Honor Society, you can actually see a lot more about the Medal of Honor itself. And it's in beautiful shape. The ribbon, everything's in beautiful shape.
And certainly the Medal of Honor no longer looks like this. Part of the reason is that the veterans organization that forms after the Civil War, the Grand Army of the Republic, their medal looks awfully close to that. And the government can't tell those guys to change their design, so they changed the design of the Medal of Honor. First as a chest hanger, then now the neck hanger that we were more familiar with.
Yeah, that's a good point. If you do see the Grand Army of the Republic's medals, they do look almost exactly like a Medal of Honor. And check out our Brotherhood and Valor series. We have a few Medal of Honor recipients that we discuss. Britt Sablinski from the War on Terror. We have Woody Williams, the last surviving World War II veteran who just passed away, who was a Medal of Honor recipient from Iwo Jima. And we meet with Melvin Morris, who was a Medal of Honor recipient from Vietnam, telling the story of William Carney, the first African-American Medal of Honor recipient at Fort Wagner. So Mike, moving forward, we've gone from an enlisted man being awarded the highest actor medal for valor to the highest ranking Union officer of the American Civil War. And we have two pieces here, and I'd like to start with the one over here. Certainly. Now that's one of the shoulder boards or shoulder straps, depending on how you want to say it, of a Major General. And what Major General is this?
That's then Major General Grant. So this is the rank that he would have been wearing when he captured Vicksburg in July of 1863.
So these would have come off of his Vicksburg uniform?
Yes. So
in theory, these would have been right on his shoulder when he's meeting with John Pemberton in early July of 1863, there outside of Vicksburg, talking about the terms of surrender.
That's correct.
That's amazing.
And this comes to us from the Grant family.
That was going to be my next question. So his son's a graduate as well?
Yeah, Frederick Denton Grant gives most of the Grant collection to the museum. We have some pieces from other branches of the family as well.
And Fred Grant was actively on the Vicksburg campaign, not as a combatant, but he was a kid who was riding along with Dad for part of it, and he is a West Point graduate himself, class of '71. So that's neat, and Fred Grant is actually buried here at West Point. Now over here we have a very impressive General Grant piece, and this is his uniform. What rank do we have here?
So he's the first 4-star general in Army history. There had been some hesitation about promoting anyone over Washington, who was a 3-star. The kind of tangle of Grant's the overall commander of Union forces, but he's junior in rank to Meade, who's commander of the Army of the Potomac. It creates enough of a tangle that after the war, they said, you know what, we're just going to create a new rank that the commander of the Army is a 4-star. So you have 4 stars on the shoulder straps, and also the buttons on the frock coat are in groupings of 4. And one thing I'd like to point out with this coat, so much of, we think of, you see pictures of Grant on campaign in the Civil War wearing kind of a big, private sack coat. Mm-hmm. Then kind of another grouping of photos when he's president, where he's a bit more heavier set. But this is a more fitted uniform of Grant in his wartime shape. Right, this is right as he comes off campaign, takes up overall command of the Army in Washington during Reconstruction. Right, and something that certainly, as our Army comes off of long periods of occupation and kind of reconstruction of Iraq and Afghanistan, there's been kind of a historical kind of revisiting of Reconstruction of the South and understanding those as military campaigns. So this is another thing that gets a lot of attention here on campus. This also goes up with some frequency up to the classroom to lead those discussions and to spark off those discussions.
Which I'm glad you said, because I was going to mention, Mike, I noticed how svelte Grant looks in at least his uniform. And it's interesting you pointed out the 4 buttons. So the buttons tell us a story. Would we see different buttons on different uniforms for junior officers versus field officers versus general officers?
Yeah, certainly. So the buttons do change somewhat, both in arrangement, in number. That he's got 2 rows rather than a single line down the coat, and then how elaborate the designs are also vary depending on rank.
So for like your lieutenants and your captains, your line officers, you'd have 1 single row of 9 buttons. Right. And then for a field grade officer, your majors, lieutenant colonels, colonels, you'd have the 2 rows of buttons, but not as close together. And then with the general officers, you would have more. And it's in fantastic shape, I can say that. And this is another wool uniform?
Yes. So wool with velvet. I should say Thayer's as well had velvet on the collars and cuffs. These would have been black originally. Over time, the light has faded them to brown a little bit. Still in pretty good shape. But that's some of that light damage. That's why we can't have these things on display constantly, because the light will chew up the fabric pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. So this was on display for the past few years. It's now back in storage and gets pulled out for special events like this one, or for classroom displays.
And that's a good point before we get to our last piece. How often do we rotate out here at the museum? I mean, some museums seem to leave things on display forever. Here, if you come back, every 2 to 3 years, it seems like there's something new.
Yeah, by Army regulation, every 2 years for cloth pieces and paper artifacts that would be sensitive to light.
That's fantastic. So if you come back to West Point, if you come once, you got to come back 2 years from then in 2 years. So you might never know what's going to be on display in a good way, because there's all kinds of different treasures.
And I will say we are still actively collecting. It is not a stagnant collection. We're growing it both to keep up with modern military history, modern Army operations, and also great pieces that come in from across history. I think we'll take a closer look at some of those when we go back upstairs.
Yeah, and one of the things that David, the curator here, said to me last night was they just acquired mechanical drawings from Ulysses S. Grant that somebody had come across Antiques Roadshow style, paid a song for, and then sold them to the museum, and now they're here being protected. I won't say how much the Army paid for them, but I will tell you that this lady, she didn't know what she had there until she did. But this is a fantastic piece. And moving forward to our last piece, the last one, is a person who really studied the American Civil War. Loved the Civil War, you know, in fact, loved American history. His mother will actually lock up his books whenever she would leave the house because he wouldn't do his chores or anything, and he found the key and would unlock it and read vociferously. And it was a man named Dwight David Eisenhower, West Point class of 1915, the class that the stars fell upon. He is one of 2 5-star generals to come out of that class, including Omar Nelson Bradley, and he is the 34th president of the United States. And Mike pulled out, because Ike is my favorite president, and he's one of my favorite generals, and he owns a house in Gettysburg. He pulls out one of Ike's uniforms for us. Mike, which uniform is this of Dwight David Eisenhower?
So this is the last uniform that he put on as a soldier. This is the uniform that he wears to his retirement ceremony at the end of his military career. And so you can see that he kept certainly he's entitled to wear every medal under the sun. Kept it pretty minimal to the many awards of the Distinguished Service Medal, which is for exemplary leadership and high command. That's this one is the DoD equivalent of that medal, and that's the Legion of Honor.
So the first ribbon here was actually earned during World War I while he was in charge of Camp Colt at Gettysburg. So that is one of the ones that he's wearing here. So there's your Civil War tie to you. Now I notice on his shoulder we have 5 stars.
Yes. So not a rank currently in service. So you see the 5 stars there on the sleeve, just over the Supreme Headquarters Allied Forces in Europe patch, the SHAFE patch.
And then down here we have his service chevrons down here,
right?
Which is this uniform's in fantastic shape. And I have to say, Ike and Mamie, they both really believed in the American Republic and left almost everything that they owned to the American people.
Yeah.
So it's very fitting that we have this here. And we also have, it's not the Ike coat, which would have been the short coat, his iconic coat. Do you have any of those here in the collection?
Not from him. This is our one Eisenhower uniform that we have. But yes, we have many Ike jackets in the collection. World War II was one of the better represented parts of our collection here.
That's awesome. And his son, John, his second son, his surviving son, graduated from West Point on June 6th, 1944. Dad was a little busy that day and he missed graduation, but Mamie was here, and as Dad is helping to liberate Europe. So I think that's a great story. My favorite story that comes from Ike and John is that when John goes over to the European theater, he meets with Dad. Dad doesn't seem too happy that he's there, but they go walking through London together, and John's all fidgety, and he said, what's your problem, son? He says, well, I'm worried about saluting, Dad, because, if someone might salute me, and I might outrank them, or you might outrank them, and his dad stopped him, and he said, there's no one in this theater that you outrank, and there's no one in this theater that outranks me. Don't worry about it. So that's one of my favorite stories. Mike, what else do you have to say about this piece? Anything else you can add?
It's in pristine condition. It was sent to us by John.
Wow.
After his father passed.
And John is buried here in the West Point Cemetery. John's also an author of a Mexican-American War book called So Far From God. So if you want to learn more about the Mexican-American War, that's fantastic. So Mike, we really can't thank you enough for breaking out these very special pieces. And when I say special pieces, I mean, this is something that you're not going to see every day. We can't thank the West Point Museum enough for having us here. We want to thank the Garrison for having us here as well. I mean, we've been all over the place. You need to check out our videos of the cemetery. Whenever those come out, you'll learn more about Fort Putnam. You'll learn about Trophy Point. There are plenty of Mexican-American War trophies out there, Civil War trophies, and beautiful setting here at the United States Military Academy at West Point. Mike, thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for Kevin. Thanks for helping us spotlight some of these great treasures.
And thank you to Gary Edelman behind the camera, Aaron Rowland for helping to set this up, and thank you for watching and for supporting battlefield preservation and education please click that subscribe button and hit that bell notification. Head over to Facebook, like our page, like the West Point Museum's page, and of course head over to battlefields.org to learn more all about the Mexican-American War, the War of 1812, and of course the American Civil War. I'm Kris White. Thank you for watching. Thank you for supporting battlefield preservation and education.